Hello, I'm Eleanor Mills. I'm a journalist and a campaigner, and we're here today to have a conversation about how we might come up with a more optimistic agenda for Britain. It's often seen at the moment that we're in a state of permanent omnishambles, kind of poly problems, all sorts of different factors impinging, particularly on the younger generation, where they feel like they no longer have a stake in the future, that nothing is working out for them quite as it should. And today we're joined by two people who think that they might have an answer to that particular kind of omnishambles. The first is Phillip Ullmann, who is a serial entrepreneur, businessman, and has a whole really exciting new idea about covenant and about how we might think about society and life differently. And Imogen Sinclair, who's the director of the new social covenant unit inside Parliament, who is trying to get MPs to really grapple with some of these issues in a new way, which might actually create some change. So, Imogen, do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about what you do and what you see the real issues are which are affecting particularly young people?
Sure, thanks, Els. Yeah, so the new social covenant unit was established by two Conservative MPs in 2021, Danny Kruger, Miriam Cates, and they, I think, were concerned that as a country, as a nation, we are attached to the fundamental relationships in our life, and that's the family, the community, and the nation. And actually, it's the job of government to be doing what they can to strengthen those associations. So I helped set up the unit. Before that, I worked for a think tank. I've got a master's in philosophy, and I'm a visiting fellow at the St Mary's Institute for Theology and Liberal Arts in Twickenham. And so my day job is trying to convene MPs cross-party, where possible, around these themes of family, community and nation.
Which to try and make them work better together.
To try and strengthen them, to try and ensure that government's doing what it can that's in its power to ensure that these associations are strong, that people have come from and have strong families that they can rely on. They're part of lively, happy communities where there are thriving high streets, and they feel a sense of belonging to the nation, the United Kingdom. And so that's what we're about. And I suppose we're trying to push back at this idea that government is just this thin organisation that simply manages money, manages the economy well. Actually, no, we think it should be deeply concerned with some of these more cultural, more social issues. You asked about young people.
Yes.
Well, I'm 29, technically a millennial. And I think, based on social media, this is where you can pick up a lot of what young people think. There is concern around housing. How am I ever going to afford a home? How am I ever going to afford a home big enough to start my own family? Mm-hmm. There is concern around, I think, life chances, for want of a better word, higher education. I think there's been a big push, particularly from our government and previous governments, that young people should be at 18 leaving home, going to university, and those universities can often push their graduates down to the southeast. Go and make money. That's what life's all about. Go to the southeast, work in the city, make money. And there hasn't actually been a concern for what you might call brain drain. What about all these places that these students come from, the sort of, student diaspora or whatever? They all come from places, but they leave those places. And there are some think tanks that have been talking about brain drain for a long, long time now, that actually, what if young people do have strong connection, association to their families, to their communities? What if actually they want to stay in Grimsby or wherever it might be? Are there the opportunities in those places up and down the country, which people are rightly very proud of, that young people can say, actually, do you know what? I don't want to follow that course of action. For me, it's not all about the money. I want to stay in Cheshire or Grimsby or whatever it is. And maybe they have caring responsibilities, for elderly parents, whatever it might be. And I just think we could do better at ensuring that there's proper place and route and options for people that think like that.
Okay, I think that's really interesting because really what we're trying to crack into today are some of the systemic things which are kind of broken. The ways that our society forces people into actions which may not necessarily be optimum for them or for their community or for their family or ultimately for kind of humanity PLC, as it were. So, Philip, I'm going to come to you because you've been doing some really interesting work about how we might remodel the state to really support people in different kinds of choices. That's what it seems to me reading your stuff around covenant. Do you want to explain a little bit about your background and what this idea is?
Yes, so my background is business.
Yes.
And it's interesting that that's critical. What I'm realizing is that in order to change the world, you need a combination of people who've actually experienced the world, working with people who have ideas, who want to change the world, but you can't do it purely with people who have had no experience. And the issue I've got at the moment with the parliamentary system, it's nobody's fault, is that the MPs and the ministers often have not had wide-ranging experience of what it's like to actually work in the world. And therefore, there's a disconnect between some of the MPs and the real world. And what I'd love to see is a reconnection with the local community, with a local place, with people. Almost MPs become community builders and actually work to build relationships with people like me who've had experience in the real world, who have ideas. But it's the state working in a covenantal way, in a relationship way, and in the same way as I'm starting to talk about is I think we have to look at 5 masters. The state is actually one. I'd just like to put that into context. There are actually 5 different institutions I think need to reset themselves, and the state is one. I don't want to overly focus just on that. There's the state, the market, there's money, there's the landowners, and there's technology. Those are 5 different masters that are actually not giving you, Imogen, what you need and not giving the opportunities. And we should talk about all of them. But the state has a critical role, as we see with COVID. There's a big role for the state, but it's not just looking after wealth and taxation. It's not redistribution. It's actually creating an environment where people can stay in their local place, can actually stay with their family and build. I love the ideas of family, community, and nation. I think that those are critical. And the relationship, your vision is phenomenal, but to make it happen, you need to work with the communities and start to actually make it real.
I'm really interested in that because I have 2 perspectives on this. One as a woman of 52, and I represent a whole community of women in midlife. I call them queenagers, who feel largely ignored and invisible because of the kind of lens that our society tends to put on women, that it values them for being fanciable and fecund, and isn't so interested when that's not the case. So I think that there's a whole way in which our current setup is not helping older women particularly, and older people generally. There are all sorts of different kind of communities within our society who I think are forgotten and who are not benefiting from the current system. And I'm also the mother of 2 daughters who are 17 and 20, and we live very near their school, so my house is a bit like a kind of informal sixth form common room. So I hear a lot of Gen Z chat about how disenfranchised they feel, how anxious they feel about the future, and in fact that we've got spiking levels of mental illness and anxiety in this generation, which is not particularly surprising if you think my eldest daughter, who's 20, was born just after 9/11, so they've known nothing but a world kind of ripped by kind of terrorist threats. My second daughter was born literally on the day of the 2005 attacks in London, and I'm sure that the cortisol kind of in the air when all of that was happening was not great. Then they've lived through 20 years of real kind of drumbeat of climate crisis kind of becoming more and more acute, and I think for that generation that's really crucial. And a massive governmental kind of economic collapse in 2008, and now a massive cost of living squeeze. And we throw in Brexit. It's not really surprising that we've got a younger generation who feel quite disenfranchised, and also that politics is not necessarily there to serve them. So I think that we're in need of a great reset when it comes to how we organise our society. My children definitely think that there's a real issue about whether they'll ever be able to afford a house. My elder daughter is at university university clocking up huge amounts of debt. And what she sees in the people who are a couple of years above her is that they come out and they can't get jobs, or they certainly can't get jobs which are going to allow them to buy a house or live in the southeast, which is what the whole funnel, as Imogen so eloquently described, is trying to get them to do. So I think there's a sense in our society that all the things which are meant to help are actually now hindering, that we've got a huge accumulation of wealth by a whole load of tech billionaires, while everybody else at the bottom is suffering. And even people who are working really hard and doing 2 or 3 jobs can't make enough money to actually survive in the current crisis. So there definitely seems to be a demand for some fairer kinds of systems. So I'm really interested in what those might look like. So you talked about your 5 pillars, Philip. Tell us a bit more about that. So let's think about debt for starters.
Okay, so we need to start engaging people's minds. Essentially, you talk about women. What we've done, women have to contribute and have to feel part of the future. I was just having a discussion with my Mark Dembowski's son is married to my daughter. We're having a family gathering to start to re-engage the kids in purpose. And the girls said, leave it to the men. They didn't want to get engaged. And I said, no, sorry, we've got to work together. It's got to be covenantal. We all work together. And the trouble is, the women have got a raw deal. I mean, so women have gone out to work, and then you have 2 incomes. What has that done? It's just inflated the price of property, inflated the mortgage. If you've got more debt, and the women are worried, they've got to deal with the household and also deal with the family. They've got a raw deal, but they've got huge amounts to contribute. We've got to re-engage with them. So you have to think about, 1 minute, is this model of debt absolutely right? And the answer is no, it's not. If we go back to, again, the 400-year reset, the banking started in about 1600s. And the concept was, it actually started with corruption, because banks found that they...
How unsurprising.
Surprise. They found that they can actually double lend. So they have £100 and they found, wow, we can actually give more loans than we got money. And then it's, wow, and we built society around this crazy model, which means that people spend their whole lives. You talked about not being able to buy a house. That is absurd. Fortunately, we were blessed, and when we started, we took on a modest mortgage and got a house, and that was affordable in my generation. It's not affordable anymore.
No.
So, and the problem there, Imogen.
Well, I just think this conversation about women and work is absolutely vital. It was obviously a really fantastic and important and good progression when women started to cooperate in the workforce. But as Philip said, what we do now have is you need 2 salaries to get a mortgage. What is that doing to families? I think it's true to say that in the UK we have some of the smallest homes and the longest commutes. So the home has become a very thin and kind of it's been totally degraded in some sense. The home should be a place where, we raise our families, but actually it's a place where we eat and sleep. And otherwise it's mum, dad, out the door, kids into nursery or into school or with nannies or childminders or whatever. And I would love to see us try and recapture or rebuild a proper kind of household economy, you might call it. The home is a place where important work is done, important work of raising children, educating them, etc., etc. And I would love to see a kind of mixed economy where mum and dad, men and women, are able to work a little bit at home with childcare, whatever it might be, a little bit out in the formal economy, working their jobs, raising some money, but also a little bit in the informal economy, involved in the PTA groups, all the stuff that goes on in the towns and the villages. That, I think, is a much healthier balance. At the moment, it's just mum and dad have both got to get out to work and kids have to be out the house, looked after by someone else.
I think that's true up to a point, but I actually think that one of the good things of the pandemic has been a massive rise of flexible working and the technology that supports that. And I think what I actually see in the people around me and the people who are part of the community that I run is that has actually got better in the last few years, that there is much more of an even split between men and women when it comes to parenting. And kind of in a way, lots of people being at home on Zoom calls has really helped that and has helped men pick up kind of, their side of the bargain because they've been at home a lot more. And what I see, I do a lot of going into corporates and talking to DEI experts and around kind of inclusion, that there's actually a big pushback from a lot of people who don't want to go back into the office full time because they quite like exactly what you're saying of being at home more. People have got more embedded in their communities. They're, as a result of not necessarily being on a train and commuting such a long way, that I think actually what you're talking about has really begun to happen a bit more during the pandemic, and that a lot of the kind of pushback that a lot of businesses are having about getting people back into offices full time is exactly what you're describing, is that people don't want to go back to that very atomized way of life.
Yes, it's sort of happened by stealth a little
Yeah.
bit. But not all work is flexible.
No, of course.
Stacking shelves is not flexible.
Yeah.
So that's a conundrum.
Yeah, and I think certainly towards the kind of the bottom end of the labour market, it's incredibly unfair, and work really doesn't pay.
So in terms of solving the problem, we have to revisit these basic assumptions.
Yeah.
Do I really need debt? The answer is no. You don't. I mean, it's a concept which was corrupt at the beginning, and it's corrupt now. We have to, and the reason why you can't buy a house or are struggling to buy a house is because the prices of assets have been massively inflated by private organisations, which crazily enough are allowed to create as much money as they want and pour it into the bank accounts of people with money, which is absurd. Because it means that you can't get what you need, and therefore what's going to sort this out is democracy, because the people like you are left behind. And what you have to do is re-engage and say, no, we don't want that.
Yeah. And how, though?
Yes, how? But
I'm saddled with hundreds of thousands of pounds of debt. And it's music to my ears, Philip, when you say we don't need debt. I do need debt in order to buy my two-bed flat.
And our children are being saddled with more debt than they ever were. I mean, I was the first year to have a student loan. That's how old I am. We were the first year where student loans came in. But then I think I left university with about £3,000 worth of student loan in total. Whereas now my children will leave with £50,000 worth of debt, £60,000 worth of debt. I mean, huge amounts, which is going to completely change the way they then look at their adult lives. So what do you think we should be doing about that?
It's a conscious decision to build an economy on debt. That's what we have to recognise. It's not automatic. We think we're an autopilot. No.
Yeah.
You don't. In the biblical model, as you know, debt gets waived every 7 years. Because debt is, that's the model. And therefore you can't have the bubble, because debt is a way of allocating resources. We need to look at debt as a way of building relationships. We're an creditor-based economy where debt is about seizing assets, charging interest, and it damages relationships. Debt, in the biblical phrase, is actually love. It's building relationships. So the answer is no. You can say the way the biblical system works is you have the ability as a state to actually create money, but not by private institutions which are using it to actually deflate and inflate assets and damage relationships. You create mutuals, which are community-based, which start to use the capability the state has got. The Levelling Up Department has got capabilities to use money, but if to distribute that to mutuals, they'll actually start to help rebuild families, work with Grimsby, with Billy Desane, I've talked about before, and start to help people to be self-sufficient and enable the women.
We're addicted to debt.
We're addicted to that, and it's a conscious decision.
Yes, I think it goes even bigger than that. I think that we're addicted to the idea that everything that's gone wrong is somebody else's fault. I think that what we see a lot in the UK is a sense that all power resides with a kind of higher institution, which I think acts as a massively disabling idea to the idea that you might actually be able to fix some things yourself within your community.
It's beautiful, beautiful idea.
And when you start to give people back agency to do things for themselves and access, say, to some communal money, or I saw it with a whole kind of local park project. It's amazing what people can do. Or you see it when it snows and our infrastructure is absolutely useless. But around my crescent, everybody cleared each other's driveways, and my husband went out and put grit down around the place. We didn't actually need the council to do that. The council couldn't do that. So I think there's something really important here about giving people some kind of sense of agency over their lives, and setting up systems, which I know you're really interested in with your new covenant, which gives power back to people to be able to do things for themselves.
Agreed. And just to explain that biblical, there is no concept in the Bible of a right. It's only about obligations, because rights create friction. I'm fighting with you because it's my right, which I'm trying to enforce. But as you say, people want purpose in their life. And if they have a purpose, they suddenly feel ignited and they're excited by what they do. And it doesn't need to be big. It's just to build a home, to build a family, to raise kids, to work on local communal issues. And by the way, that is important. It's got to be not just, we all have to think beyond the family. The starting point is, I'm going to care for my loved ones in the family. But you also need to think about what you can do for the community.
Yeah.
And therefore, and that's why your concept of family, community, nation is spot on. It's got to be at all three levels.
But I think that what's happened very much within my lifetime is that those kind of community institutions have been massively weakened. I mean, if I think about my grandmother, she lived till she was 97. When she was 95, she used to say, "Oh, I'm just going out to do the meals for the old dears," and she was doing Meals on Wheels for everyone in her community, most of whom were younger than she was. But she had a real sense of that kind of noblesse oblige, that she should give back, and the community that she lived in, which was that in Berkshire, really looked after itself. I think there were a lot more of those kind of institutions after the war in some ways than there are now, and people felt that they could help and that they should help. And I'm interested in the millennial view. I think that there's quite a lot more of those kind of cooperatives coming back, and just that sense that people themselves can do things, can have an impact. And that's what I really hear from the young people around my table, that they need back a sense that they have some levers to pull, that there are things that they can access which might actually help their lives progress. And I don't think we hear about that enough.
No, and I think that's right. But I think our culture and our systems need to catch up with them. So thinking about Philip's point about, okay, our economy is built on debt, that is a bad thing. But it's true. And so kind of ripping debt away in one sense is completely explosive, because it kind of blows up the economy, which is built on a foundation of debt. So what needs to happen, I think, is our sort of culture needs to catch up with that mindset. And we're not there yet. So for instance, community land trusts, absolutely brilliant mechanism. Community groups can come together, they can form a trust, and they can bid for land to build affordable homes for themselves and their community. And there's all sorts of ways in which finance becomes more accessible once you've set up a community land trust. It's amazing, it's brilliant. However, there is built into the community land trust sort of agenda that you're building homes for your family and your community in perpetuity. Now that means it's going to be quite difficult to make masses and masses and masses of profit on selling those homes that you've built for your family and for your community. So here I am, young person, community land trust sounds brilliant because I want to be involved in building something for me, for my family and for my community. But everyone else is making masses of money off buying and selling their property. Whereas if you buy into the community land trust imagination idea, then you've got to be prepared to give up on this idea that you're going to make tons of cash off your assets.
What? Because you basically have to. If you get one of those, you have to say you're gonna live there. You don't really own it.
There are various restrictions around resale, which just means it stops you from treating your home as a financial asset, and forces you to treat your home that you've built not as a financial asset, but as something that's actually for something bigger than yourself,
for living in, or for
living in, and for your community. But we are. I think it is an addiction. We are addicted to thinking of our homes as our financial assets. It's the biggest financial asset I own, saddled with debt, but it's the biggest financial asset I own. So it's very difficult, I think, to get our young people want to do more for themselves, but that also requires thinking in a very different way, that your home's not yours, for instance.
So how do you get, Philip, from that system to one which is different, that might be fairer? You're a businessman, you understand the money.
There's two ways. I hear it looks daunting.
Very.
And it's because we're changing the world.
Yeah.
But it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I tell you why. Because we're going to have a massive collapse. See what happens last time, 2008, you have a collapse and the bankers tell the politicians what to do. And they say, bail us out. And none of the issues have been resolved. We are exactly the same position. There's no reason why we can't have a repeat of 2000, and we will, in a much bigger way. The question is, this time, if we start to think about what we're going to do and get ready with plans, we can say to the bankers, no, not this time. We're not going to go with your alternative. We've actually thought this through. There's an alternative. So system one is, and I think we'll have this systemic failure of all the five masters, which is the state, not just the banks. I think the state's in a mess. International,
we know is in a mess. Yes.
China is a massive problem because we're completely in bed with China. Now, Jinping is talking about he's talking in Marxist terms. It's clear there's no, and yet all these companies have actually invested in China. Yet he's a Marxist. So how do you deal with that? So effectively, we've got serious problems internationally. So everything is failing. So what we need to do is revisit the whole system and ready when it happens that we then say, no, this time round, we've got a conversation. We're ready to get it right when the system fails. The other way of doing it is democracy. And if you get a political party, Conservative, Labour, it doesn't matter who engages with this and starts to get people, they will win the next election. And going to whoever actually harnesses this opportunity, people will have a vision. And then democracy will start saying, okay, the kids, I'm not going to vote the end of banking because I can't, but let's put it to the people. Let's do an example of a Brexit and say, what do people actually think? Get a conversation which is not elitist in very simple terms. And people say, no, I don't want debt. And I didn't realise there was an option because no one's given them the option because this has all been decided by the elites.
No.
And if you take it away from the elites, it can be done by democracy or it's one of the two.
I know, and I think that what's really crucial there is beginning to put different kinds of ideas of how we might organise our society on the table. Because what I hear from the children in my kitchen every day is just a sense of slight despair in the system that they're coming into. They can see that it's not working, from climate change, and they're very exercised around that, to the anxiety, the huge levels of anxiety they see in the people around them, to the debt that they're going to take on when they go to university, to a lack of access to some of the things that they might want to do. I think the conversation for young people at the moment is very apocalyptic. They can feel that we're kind of in the end times, I think, of the system that we're living in. And I think the sensible thing in that situation to do is not just to let the whole thing kind of collapse and us go back to kind of an anarchy in the road, but to have some plans for what that might look like. And I'm very interested in what you say, because, for instance, on the fuel money that the government's been trying to put in to stop our fuel bills going through the roof, £100 billion. I mean, you could easily put that towards some much better ways of all sorting things out. It's amazing how the money is available when it comes to bailing out the bankers or propping up the financial system, or for COVID, where when people say, well, actually, we could reorganise our society and think about this in a different way and it'll cost X, the sums of money are not that dissimilar.
It's worse than that, because if you look at what's actually happening, companies that have no increase in costs, energy companies, are being allowed by the states to simply steal. It's nothing else, and kill. It's not minced on words. They're stealing and killing people because money's taken away from poor people that can't put food on the table and can't heat the house, and they're going to die.
Yeah.
And we allow it. We sit back. No, fine. Fine. It's capitalism. It's a system. Fine. Let's continue to allow it to happen. And it's even worse. And then we say, okay, it's not bad enough they can't afford energy, and the energy bills have increased fivefold.
Yeah.
Let's take more money from them.
Yeah.
And let's increase interest rates. It's complete nonsense.
And it's also it's particularly wrong when you see that those big fossil fuel kind of creators, distributors, have also lied so massively around climate change. All the stuff that came out around Exxon last week, that they knew in the 70s exactly what the result was of going on selling kind of petrol and fossil fuels. And it feels particularly galling to me that the very people who are now benefiting from the energy crisis are the people who are really responsible for destroying the planet and just for stopping things which actually might have helped ameliorated that in the last 30 years.
It's even worse than that, because why do you think they're increasing interest rates? Why have we got this theory that when we have inflation, we increase interest rates? It's bizarre.
Yeah.
You know why? It's horrific. It's because they're worried about a wage cost spiral. They're worried about costs increasing because people need more money to put food on the table. Therefore, let's crush them.
Yeah.
Let's make interest rates high so they've got no food to put on the table. They can't,
and they can't
legislation
protest.
about strikes.
Yeah.
Wrong direction. Fundamentally wrong. We've got to start supporting these people so that we actually. But it's destroyed. So therefore they can't compete. Therefore we'll be able to crush them, and therefore the wages won't go up. They'll be in poverty, and therefore we'll deal with. It's an obscene concept.
Yeah.
And no one's talking about it.
But the current system is entirely set up to make the rich richer.
It's obscene.